Hello, friends. Very good morning to one and all. Abhi Gyaji didn't have the link, so Madam has sent the link, and very soon she will join with us. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, did you get the message? So,
Yes,
very
ma'am.
soon she will join with us, and we will be able to begin. It is already 10:35. Sorry for being late. Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Good morning.
Very good morning, Abhigya ji.
Good morning. How have
So,
you been?
fine. So,
Yes.
Abhigya ji is here, and let me introduce her to our student participants. Am I audible to you,
Yes.
student friends? Okay. So, she has done her BA from St. Xavier's College and MA from Maharaja Sayaji Rao University of Vadodara. Right now, she is pursuing her PhD in English literature from Pandit Dindayal Energy University, Her topic is very wonderful, a genealogical reconstruction of existential themes in Fyodor Dostoevsky's fiction. I will not go into other details, but I will talk about her publications. For example, she has written an article, Living a Gently Transgressive Life, Thoughts on Elizabeth and Her German Garden. Bhatt Priti and Nidhi Sharma, Traversing the Boundaries, Critical Essays on Modern Short Fiction, Amazon Kindle. Another article is Social Marginalization in the God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy and The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Then Subverting Adult Hegemony, an examination of child-centric narratives in the context of Shklovsky's theoretical framework. Then COVID-19 as Muse, an examination of the possibility of paradigm shift in contemporary literature. And finally, an advancement towards a green equal future, an ecofeminist study of Han Kang's Vegetarian and the Fruit of My Woman. I'm sorry because I'm an old man and this was in small letters. So I managed somehow to read it. On behalf of the students and on behalf of the department, we welcome you, Abhigya ji. And she is going to talk about GATE, NET, and SET. She has passed almost all examinations. So she has passed UGC NET, Gujarat SET, GATE, IIT Kharagpur, and NPTEL, etc. So we welcome you and hand over to you, and you talk to our students. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Firstly, I'm very sorry that I'm a little late. There was some issue with the Zoom app on my laptop. I request all of you to be interactive. Since it's an exam oriented workshop like session, I don't want it to be a passive lecture where I'm divulging information and you're just taking it in. So I don't want it to be an osmosis sort of a thing. So if possible, switch on your cameras. If possible, interact. Right at any point, if you think you need to interrupt me and ask a question, then please do. So I'll share my screen. I have a PPT. Firstly, I'd like to know that how many of you have appeared for GATE this year, 2024. You can either raise your hand or type or just speak up. Right. So far, no one. Right. But do you know of the pattern and are you acquainted with the exam or how many of you have appeared for NET? Right. This will be an interactive session. So please do speak up. Right. No one's appeared for NET also or GSET. Okay. So Vidya has. Okay. Right. So a few of you have. Okay, so someone's already qualified for GSET, right? So I think that you're all oriented towards appearing for the exam. It's not a lecture that you're listening to, right? You want practical tips. That I will primarily talk about the GATE exam, since GATE is the exam that employs your critical thinking the most, and the syllabus is more or less same for GATE, NET, and SET. So I will talk mostly about the GATE exam, but it will also cover NET and GSET. Right. So I'll share my screen. Do let me know if you're able to. Mm, just a second. Right.
Abhigya ji, our students are completely fresh, and some of them are studying in or just past second semester. So they have no experience of appearing in any kind of
Okay.
examination.
Right. Sir, but can you see my screen? I've just shared the PPT.
No,
No?
no.
Okay. Okay, if you're typing, then I can't read because I'll be in another tab. But
Hello. Hello.
Hello, ma'am. Are you there, ma'am? Hello. Hello, ma'am. Are you there?
Hello. Can you hear me? Am I audible? I think I'm having some sort of technical issue. So, okay, I think Khushi has typed yes. So I'll share my screen. Please let me know if you can see it. Right? Can you see my PPT?
Yes.
Okay. Right, I'm so sorry. Right. So the PPT is primarily about GATE. Please interrupt and ask me if there's anything that you want to say. Right. So the exam, a NET exam, SET exam, or GATE exam, they're rather feared, right? We constantly talk of how to get through these exams and they cause a lot of stress. But I'm trying to, I think I'll attempt to say that it's not really that huge a deal, right? So the idea is that, like David Ignatov, right? He was this American poet and school teacher. So he said, just a second. He said that I should be content to look at a mountain for what it is and not as a comment on my life. The idea is that GATE, NET, or SET, right? These are exams, and that is all, right? That is the extent of it. That they're exams. They're not a comment on your personality or on your life. They might help you with your career, but that is the extent of it, right? So the idea is to approach your preparation, the idea is to approach any exam or any milestone with the idea that this doesn't reflect on who you are, and therefore you're more objective, therefore you're more detached, and therefore chances are that you'll be less stressed. So always think of this quote when you begin to prepare or when you're stuck, right? It'll help you trudge through life also. So think of David Ignatov and how he said that I should be content to look at a mountain for what it is and not as a comment on my life. So GATE is an exam, NET is an exam, and that is it, right? Nothing more than that. Now, GATE is primarily an engineering exam, graduate aptitude test in engineering. It was first conducted for students who wanted to take admission in MTech, but since the last 3 or 4 years, it's branched out into English, into linguistics, into philosophy, into psychology, and so on. So anyone who's in their third year of a UG course, right, can appear. There are n number of attempts that they can take. There's no age limit to get. The benefits are that in a lot of places you get around 25,000 stipend, like how you get for JRF, right? 30 something. That way you get for GATE also. You can seek admission in any MA English courses in IITs and other institutes in central government universities. You can apply for PhD programs. Sometimes you're exempted from the PET, which is the institute's PhD entrance test, right? So sometimes if you have GATE or if you have NET, then you're directly called in for the interview. You can take in any public sector undertaking jobs in the HSS category. HSS is humanities and social sciences. So that is an option, right? So there are multiple benefits to GATE. More than that, it also brings a certain credibility to your resume. If you appear for an interview for some other job, right? That's not related to GATE, but then if you've cleared the test, it shows that you have a certain aptitude because you've cleared the exam. So it's always a good idea to clear GATE. And another thing is that since you're all students of BA or MA, right? So for 5 years, you've studied literature. So paper 2, the syllabus for paper 2 is quite fresh in your mind. So all you have to do is do paper 1 diligently and then appear for GATE, NET, and SET together. So NET and SET will happen in November, December, tentatively. GATE generally happens in February, or it might happen in January, right? So all of these exams are within a certain stipulated period of time, and therefore you can appear for them together since the syllabus is also more or less similar. And once you get through these exams, then apply for a PhD program or for a job, right? So things become much more sorted if you directly appear for these tests in your last year of MA or in your first year of MA or immediately post your masters, but not later, because then you'll have a job and then it becomes difficult if you lose touch with the subject and so on. Right now, the scheme marking scheme and the pattern for GATE is a little different as compared to NET. Right, so you'll have 65 questions and you'll have ample time. You'll have 3 hours. Unlike in NET, where you have 150 questions and you still have 3 hours. Right, so GATE is an exam that will not test your speed. Right, it will test your accuracy because GATE also has negative marking. So for 1 mark questions, -1/3. And for 2 mark questions, 2/3 of the mark is deducted. So it's a little tricky. If you do not know the answer, if you're unsure, then do not attempt the question, right? Sometimes you think that, oh, tentatively, I think this is the answer because I feel so. But do not attempt questions like that because there'll be negative marking. Some questions in GATE won't have negative marking. So with GATE, what you should do is that you should read the headings of each section. There will be different sections in the exam. So read each section and then see if the section says on top, the heading says that there is negative marking or there's not negative marking. So constantly read that. There'll be MSQs, which is multiple select questions. We'll do a few examples, but an MSQ is when one or more than one answer may be right? So A, B, A, B, C, or A, B, C, D. Right, so if you've chosen 2 out of 3 correct answers, then you do not get the mark. If you've chosen 2 correct and 1 wrong, then you don't get the mark. So MSQs are more tricky, but there are no negative marking in MSQs. So attempt all MSQs. Right, so GATE is a more complicated exam. It's conducted by IISc, Indian Institute of Science, or one of the IITs. So it's different every year. But GATE is very tricky because it has MSQs, MCQs, of course, for literature, and then it has numerical ability test questions, so a general aptitude section, right? But it's only for 15 marks. 85 marks are for your English literature section, or if you've applied for linguistics, then linguistics or philosophy. So 15 marks only for NATQs and so on, but 85 marks for literature. So if you are clear and if your foundation is strong in your core subject, then you will clear the exam, right? So the syllabus is same for NET. You'll have to do British literature, you'll have to do cultural studies, you'll have to do theories, you'll have to look at poetry, fiction, plays, and so on. So the syllabus is the same. And if you are clear with your paper 2, then you will get through the exam, right? And another important thing with GATE is that be wary of negative marking and therefore do not attempt questions that you're not sure of. You can make a guess, but it has to be an educated guess, right? It cannot just be gut feeling whatsoever. Right, now look at the cutoff. So this is the code for English literature, which is XHC2. So for XHC2, in 2021, the cutoff was 43% for general category, and 2024, it's now around 53, right? So a good idea is to aim for 60% or more in the GATE exam. And it's not very difficult, right? With NET, you have top 6% of all those who appear, around 10 lakh people appear for NET, right? And then you have to be in the top 6%. If you want JRF, then you have to be in the top 1%. Right, so with NET, it's very difficult. With GATE, you just have to get more than the cutoff, which is more than 55% tentatively, so 60% tentatively. So it is not very difficult if you're clear with your core subject with paper 2. So always keep in mind that you have to aim to score a little more than the cutoff that was last year. This is the syllabus for GATE. Right, so there is multi-genre literatures in English. There is poetry, there is novel, there is fiction, drama, there is translation, there is cultural studies, there is English literature, English literary studies, so history of English in India, right? There is different ideologies, there's research approach, right? So all of them you will study in NET. So a good idea is to do all of it together, right? So this is the syllabus for GATE. This is the syllabus for NET. Now, as you can see that the syllabus is vast, right? How much can you cover? Because within drama, there's theater of the absurd. There is drama in India, Girish Karnad, for example. There is drama in Germany. If you've read Mother Courage and Her Children, there is all sorts, right? There are movements associated with it. There is world literature, there is Indian literature, there is European literature, fiction, there is short story. So there is this is a course that is just divided in 10 units, but it's really, really vast, right? So you can't know everything. A sensible thing would be to have a T-shaped approach to your studies, which is that you cover the breadth of the discipline, meaning that you begin from Chaucer and then you read until Salman Rushdie, for example, right? Something, or authors and texts for contemporary. And then there's also a deeper reading, right? So therefore a T-shaped approach that has width, but that also has depth. So whenever you're reading, ask yourself that why is it that I'm reading this text? What are the characters? Why are these characters important? What is the movement that is associated with this text? Who is the author? Has he won the Booker? Why did he win the Booker? Listen to their Nobel Prize acceptance speeches if they have won something, right? So always approach your studies with a T-shaped approach, right? It's very easy. For example, it's easy in the sense that you should be clear that there is now a lens that you have with which to approach your studies. For example, there is also another that's called the bell curve, right? So it looks like a U. So initially, for example, when you're reading Shakespeare, right? Initially, it appears like Shakespeare is very difficult because sometimes the language, Old English or Shakespearean English is very difficult to grasp. But once you know the codes of the language, it becomes easy. So you've reached the midpoint of the U, right? Of the bell-shaped curve. And then once you understand what it means, you think it's easy. And again, you reach the top, right? In the U shape, where you think that what he's saying, I've understood, but it is very deep, right? So when you read King Lear, you think that, I do not understand it because there's a language barrier. Then you think that, I understand what they're saying. So perhaps it's not that difficult or not that great a task to read Shakespeare. And then when you reach the top of the bell curve, you think that, I understand what Shakespeare is trying to say, but Shakespearean texts have proved the test of time because what he's saying is very profound, right? And it still is relevant. And therefore, there's a bell curve approach, for example, to Shakespeare and to all of canonical literature. So when you approach a text or an author, make sure that your approach is T-shaped. Right? That just helps because it's a criteria that you keep in mind. Now, these are some general tips, right? That you have to revise. If you read everything, right? If you read 4 books and if you do not revise, then it doesn't really make sense. So you have to be consistent with your revision. W.H. Auden, right? You've heard of him, I'm sure. He's a poet who wrote very lovely poetry. There's a poem where I'm digressing a little bit, but it's very beautiful. And he said that it's about an equation of lovers, right? An equation between lovers, where he says that if equal love cannot be, let the more loving one be me. Right? So he wrote poetry like that. So what he said was that routine in an intelligent man is a sign of ambition. So no matter how intelligent you are, if you want to succeed, there has to be a certain discipline to what you do. There has to be consistency and you have to revise and have a routine. So the idea is that perhaps have a small notebook where you're making notes and read the notebook every day, even if it's a thin 100-page notebook and you filled half of it, right? Read every day because your memory is most times visual, right? You have photographic memory. So sometimes you remember things that you've seen. You remember that, this image was on the left side of the page and it had to do with so and so. So use mnemonics, use drawings, use colors, take printouts and stick these pages all around your house, right? So keep yourself acquainted with the information, with the authors, with the timelines, so that after once you're acquainted with information, you can be critical about it, right? The first step is to know the information. The second step is to be critical of it and make a critique, right? So the idea first is to quote unquote cram some information and then be critical of it. So use whatever method works for you, right? Use different media. Sometimes if you're tired of studying, watch a movie that's based on the book, right? If you're tired of reading from a book, watch a lecture on YouTube. Sometimes if you know that all of us together, like we're a group of 25 people today, right? So if you know that 20 of you are preparing for GATE, then have a WhatsApp group, right? Share some information that you find, take mock tests together. So find a support group. This will help you stay motivated, avoid predatory coaching classes, right? That just elicit a fee from you and then send you material. Plenty of material is available online, so you don't need to join a coaching class. Ideally, you only coaching classes will make you sort of attend classes, make you be accountable, right? That you've paid a certain fee, now you have to get up at 7 in the morning and you have to be there for 1 hour. So you should be able to do it by yourself without having to pay someone to make you accountable, right? So coaching classes, most of them I found on the internet will be predatory. So try and avoid a coaching class, but if you think you need one, then you know what's best for you. But a good idea would be to find a support group, right? Practice lots and lots of previous year questions for NET. For GATE, of course, they're limited because only I think 3 or 4 exams have been conducted. So for GATE, do all of the questions that have come, do all the options, right? So if you see a question and if you know that, for example, this won't be asked, I'm sure, because it's very basic, but if someone asks in the exam that who wrote A Room of One's Own, right? You know that Virginia Woolf is the writer, and option C is Virginia Woolf. So your gaze directly falls onto the third option, which is Virginia Woolf. You take it and you move forward, right? But because it's a mock test and because you're practicing at home, the idea is to look at all 4 options. So if the other 3 options are Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Mahashweta Devi, right? So look at all 3 writers, look what they've written, study their lives, study their ideologies, and then move on to the next question, right? So initially, do not think that, oh, I have 3 hours, I have to solve 65 questions. Take it slowly, look at all the options, and then move on to the next one, right? So because chances are that in the next exam, in the next year, they might ask you a question that is related to one of the options that they had in the previous year. So look at all the 4 options clearly. Another thing you can do is read excerpts, right? Because it's very difficult to read a novel. But sometimes when you've done the summary, it's always a good idea to read a passage from the novel or read a whole poem, because sometimes poems tend to be short. Read a certain tract, right? So this will acquaint you with the writing style of the author. And sometimes when a certain quote is given, right, and you're asked, for example, I think last year they asked a question in GATE that matched the following excerpts with the authors. So sometimes if you know the style, sometimes you know that, for example, Henry James writes very ornamental prose, right? Nabokov writes very ornamental prose. But if you look at George Orwell, his prose is very clinical, right? So you'll be able to guess who is the writer also based on their writing styles. So read certain excerpts so that you can make an educated guess. So that also is a good idea. That, of course, you can't read all the novels that are prescribed, right? You can't read James Joyce and Virginia Woolf and Orwell and Jonathan Swift and all of them. But you can read a page or 2. You can read 1 paragraph. You can read popular quotes. Go to Goodreads. Look up the quotes, right? So this will help you have a more exam-oriented approach. And also because you're students of literature, I assume that you're interested in reading. I assume that you're inclined towards writing, and therefore it's always a pleasurable activity to do this, right? So do this. For paper 2, it's very important to know certain formulas. You can, of course, also employ logic and do it the long way. But if you know that certain formulas work, for example, you know that there is a formula for interest rate, there are different kinds of interest. So remember the formula beforehand, right? Know how to calculate percentage, ratio, sequence, speed, time, distance, permutation, combination, clock arrangement. Some questions are very difficult. If you know that you're unsure, right, and you won't reach a conclusive answer, then it's best to skip that question. So for example, they'll ask questions like this in GATE, that how many times will the minute hand and the second hand of a clock cross each other from 12 a.m. to 12:55 p.m., something like that, right? So we don't know a formula. Or sometimes they'll ask that the moon, sun, and the earth are in an eclipse. Now the angle is 82 point something degrees. Then the moves these many degrees. So now what is the new angle? So sometimes if you know that, you won't be able to calculate. And the options are also very so the options are, for example, 178.64, something like that. And then they're very far apart. So you can't put in the option in the equation and then cross check. Also, the best thing would be to skip these questions because there is negative marking in GATE. But there are certain questions that will be easy. Bar graphs will be easy. Ratio questions will be easy. Speed, time, distance is fairly basic. So if you do these questions, it'll help, right? Because if you, even if you spend half a day or one day doing these questions, once you've cracked the code, right? Once you know the structure, once you know the pattern of these questions, that for example, that if there are 7 men, they make a building in 10 days. Then if we have 14 men, how many days will it take to create the same kind of building now? So if you know the pattern, if you know the formula, then you can do any of these questions, right? So spend some time for paper 1. Sorry, this is paper 1, right? It's a type of written paper 2, but it's paper 1 for NET and the first section for GATE. So that, then logic is something that's important. Logic in the sense of the West, right? Western logic is easy because it is fairly direct. Like for example, assertion is, or statement A is that all men are mortal. Statement 2 is that Socrates is a man. So therefore, logic dictates that Socrates is mortal. Since all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. But with Indian logic, you'll have to learn the terminology. So the idea is that there'll be pramanas, there'll be upmanas, so on, right? So you will understand that here the answer is that Socrates is mortal. But statement A will be called, for example, praman. Statement 2 might be called pratyaksh, so on and so forth, right? I don't know the terms now. I did it, I think, 2 years ago. But the idea is to learn the terminology because you might understand the assertion, you might understand the reason, you might understand what happens when so and so are true, what can be deduced from this, but you won't know the terminology. So because we've not studied it in school, in college, or later on, right? So with Indian logic, it's important to know the terms, especially for NET. So this is there. Keep up with contemporary developments, what happened with Salman Rushdie, for example, right? 2 years ago, how he wrote the book Knife about it. What is happening with Spivak nowadays, how she went to JNU, what was the issue? So what is the essay that she wrote? Can the subaltern speak? What is it about, right? What does she argue in the essay? So keep up with contemporary developments. And whenever you approach a text or an author, right, ask these questions. Why was it written? When was it written? How was it written? And so what, right? How does it matter to me? Why is it that when Marquez wrote 100 Years of Solitude, why is it that a story that is so entrenched in the time and culture of Latin America, why is it important to me as a student of literature in India in 2024, right? How is it that it has stood the test of time? Why did he win the Nobel Prize in Literature? What is the book about? And how is it that out of context, because I don't know the culture of Latin America, right? How is it still relevant if I pick it out of context and view it from my position as an Indian student in 2024? So ask these sort of questions, right? Ask why Shakespeare wrote Macbeth, right? Which king or queen was around, and to please whom did he write this text? Who was the patron then, how was it received, what are the superstitions around the text, so on and so forth, and why is it relevant today. So whenever you approach a text, use the T-shaped approach and ask these questions, right? Just don't mindlessly remember the details for the sake of the exam. We're also students of literature, and literature is a way of life. And therefore, these questions become all the more important, right? Not just from the perspective of the exam. Right now, I believe that there are no prescribed texts because all of you have your own taste, because all of you have certain texts that you've studied from day one since the time you enrolled in college, and therefore do what works best for you. But these are certain texts that I would recommend, right? M.H. Abrams' Glossary of Literary Terms, M.A.R. Habib, Norton Anthology, Oxford Companion, M.K. Nayak for Indian Literature, A.K. Mehrotra. So here, I think the idea is also you can have a PDF of these texts. So whenever you're studying, if you just want to look up one author, just use the Control F option and read that paragraph, right? Because these are huge books. If you look at M.A.R. Habib, it is some 1,000 pages long. It's very hefty a text, right? Therefore, you can't cover everything. So read certain sections from all of the books. M.H. Abrams is a tiny book. And it's got all these literary terms, movements, novels, right? So it's a good book to have and to read on the side. For other things, right? For world literature or for marginalized study, marginalized literature, for Dalit literature, for example, feminist critique. Sometimes you might not have a specific book, but you can look up lectures on YouTube or read up information online. There's plenty online. So you can do that. Another thing is that always keep one book handy and always rely on your own notes. And because if you read everything, then chances are that you won't remember everything, right? It's like how if you highlight everything, then you have nothing in your text. So focus on one or two books that you swear by, and then stick to these books, right? All of them are equally good books. All of them will miss certain portions that are important. All of them will have certain portions that others won't have. But remember that whatever is missing in the books can be supplemented with information from the internet and from your lectures. Always also align what you study in college with what you're preparing for NET. So for example, if you're reading Dr. Faustus in college, right, you can go home in your notebook, you can write down questions that were asked on Dr. Faustus in NET, right, through all these years. So Google that questions in NET on Dr. Faustus, and then try and see what you've read in college. Does it or does it not suffice for your preparation for NET? If not, then supplement it, right, with your own reading from the internet or from a certain book. So always align what you're doing in college with your preparation for NET and GATE, right, and SET also. So if you prepare for GATE and NET, I think SET is comparatively easy and you'll get through. So that is one option. Now we'll do some questions. So I'd want you all to answer, right? So whoever has the answer might unmute and say it, right? I've taken some questions from paper 1 in GATE and NET and some questions, more questions from paper 2, right? So if all of you know the answer, then please unmute. I won't read the chat because I'm on another tab. So unmute and explain the logic of the question, right? It will be interactive. It will help if you do some questions. It will also motivate you because I think these questions are fairly direct, right? They're fairly easy. So it'll help you be more confident that if these are the sorts of questions there are, then the cracking the exam is not really that big a deal. Right, so this is the first one. Right, so we have to find out what is the value of x in the sequence. In this sequence, so there's a certain pattern to this sequence. Right, so look at it. If you're still in the session and if you're listening, then please unmute and try and answer. And if you're typing, then I won't be able to see.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Is it
Who
the
is this?
this side, Srushti Dave?
Okay, Shishri, yes.
Answer D, 31.
Huh. Okay, how did you reach this conclusion?
It's just that three by multiplying all the numbers by 2 plus 1.
Correct, right? So D is the correct answer. So 3 into 2, 6 plus 1, 7 into 2, 14 plus 1. So 15 into 2, 30 plus 1. So 31 D is the answer. And then you also check 31 into 2 plus 1 is 63. Then 63 into 2 plus 1. So on, right? So this is fairly basic. Right? So sequence is one sort of question or structure that will be asked. Another is this, right? Relationship between words. So music is to notes, what is to what, right? There are 4 options. So anyone who wants to unmute and answer? Right, so the words have to have the same relationship that the words music and notes have with each other. Right, no one? Right, so music is composed of notes, and I think in just that way, a brick constitutes, or a number of bricks constitute a house. Right, so option C will be correct. If you've typed it out, then I've not read it. But you have to see if the relationship matches the word. So this is one pattern, and this is also fairly easy. So these sorts of questions are very scoring questions. There'll be difficult ones also. For that, you'll have to learn the formula. But these questions you can do without any sort of preparation also. Right now, look at this. I need a notebook and a pen, right? So make a diagram. It always helps. You'll get a rough sheet in the exam also. So try and do this and answer, right? So P, Q, R, S, T and U. There are 6 people who are sitting in a circle and they're facing the center, but they are not in the same order, P, Q, R, S, T, U. So now these are the statements that they've given. P has to sit next to S and T. So P has to be between S and T. Now Q sits diametrically opposite to P. And the shortest distance between S and R is equal to the shortest distance between T and U. So Q is sitting next to whom? Or which 2 persons or letters? Did anyone make the diagram? No? Should I ask someone randomly? So if you practice these sorts of questions every day, it'll become fairly easy, right? You just have to draw a circle, have 6 places, and then draw as per the instructions. This is also fairly basic, right? If you see the difficult questions, then this one will appear to be more scoring. So, did anyone do it thus far?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is it who is speaking?
Ma'am, Khushi Patel.
Yes, Khushi, tell me.
Ma'am, according to me, the answer can be R and U, option C.
So Q is between R and U.
Yes,
Is
ma'am.
that what you're saying? Right. So I think that's correct. Right. So if you make the drawing, then what is the order in which they're sitting? Clockwise, perhaps, if you can tell us.
Starting from S,
Hmm.
P, T,
Hmm.
U, Q, and R.
Right. So then you can match that P does sit next to S and T. Q is opposite to P, and the shortest distance between S and R is equals to the shortest distance between T and U. Right. So you can cross check also on your own. So that is correct, right? The answer is C, which is R and U. So you can draw these things on the rough sheet and figure it out. Now look at this one, right? So this is a diagram. The doors are closed. There is a point P and there is a point Q. Now, what is the minimum number of doors that need to be opened in order to go from point P to point Q? Right, so you're here at P and you need to reach Q. So how many doors, minimum number of doors do you need to open? Right, you just have to look at the diagram. So you'll have to open at least one door, which is this one, because otherwise you'll be stuck in the first horizontal slab. Right, and once here in the second slab, you'll have to open this one and you can have direct access to Q. Right, so the answer is 2. This I don't think even merits a lot of discussion because it's really just there. Right. So these sorts of questions will be easy. The difficult ones will be permutation combination where there'll be 4 or 5 shapes given. They'll be cut up in different ways and then they'll ask you that how many triangles, squares fit in these 16, 36, 48, so on. So sometimes it's difficult to find the exact figure, right? And especially if there's negative marking, then skip those questions if you're unsure. Right, so now we'll do literature questions, right? So whoever knows this answer, then please unmute and say. So Eric Arthur Blair, who was born in Motihari in Bihar, he went on to become famous as an author of a dystopian work which introduced the terms newspeak, thought crime, doublespeak, etc. So what is the pseudonym that he wrote under? Right, so there are lots of hints in this question. We know that Eric Arthur Blair is the real name of the writer. We know that this writer was born in Motihari in India. We know that he wrote a very famous dystopian work. We also know that this dystopian work has the phrases newspeak, thought crime, doublespeak, and so on. Right? So who is this author?
George Orwell.
Right. So George Orwell is the author, right? This is asked last year in NET. So, and which is the book that they're talking about, dystopian work?
Nineteen 1949.
Right, so 1984. And a trick
Sorry.
with this book is that 1984 was written in 1948. Right, so if you just invert the numbers. So there are certain patterns, right, that you can keep in mind. So 1984 written in 1948, like that. So 1984 is the book. It's very important from the perspective of net, gate, set. Right, they love George Orwell. They ask a question more or less every year. Certain writers, certain texts are favorite. Like there's Pilgrim's Progress, right? All of Shakespeare's dramas. There is Virginia Woolf, there's James Joyce. So there are certain authors that are repeatedly asked, especially in NET. GATE is relatively new, so it's difficult to really have a pattern or a blueprint to the exam. But with NET, there are certain authors that are invariably asked. So George Orwell is one of those. So be very thorough with George Orwell. Be thorough with non-famous works of George Orwell, right? Like The White Peacock. D.H. Lawrence also wrote a text called The White Peacock. George Orwell also wrote an essay called The White Peacock. So the idea is to also know non-famous works of famous authors and to also know famous works of non-famous authors, right? There'll be authors who wrote just one text. For example, Harper Lee just wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. Of course, later a sequel was found, right? And then it was published after she died and so on. But she wrote one book in her life, and that's become canonical, right? To Kill a Mockingbird. So look at famous authors and their non-famous works. For example, look at Shakespearean sonnets that are not very famous. We only talk of Shakespearean tragedies or romances or histories, but no one will talk of the less famous Shakespearean sonnets. So know those also. Know famous works of non-famous authors, right? Like, for example, To Kill a Mockingbird, or one book that's become famous for the authors. So on and so forth. Right? Look at the authors who've won Booker Prizes. Look at the authors who've won Nobel Prizes. There was a question in GATE last year as to who has won the Booker Prize twice. And then there are options. For example, another question has been in NET that who has won the Booker of Bookers. So after each year, someone wins the Booker, right? And there's the Booker and then there's the International Booker. The International Booker is for translated works. For example, how I think 2 years ago, Gitanjali Shri became the first author to win the International Booker for a Hindi book, right? Ret Samadhi, or translated as Tomb of Sand. So know who translated it, know the difference between International Booker and the Booker Prize, and who wins the Booker wins, right? So what is the Booker of the Booker? So when each year someone's won the Booker Prize, right? So after 25 years, they did a competition called Booker of the Booker, where the best of all the Booker Prize winning books was chosen, and that was Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children. Right? So know what the Midnight's Children is about. Who are the characters? Why was it criticized by the then ruling government? What is it about? How are the elements of magic realism depicted in the book? Right? What is magic realism? Who are the other authors who employ magic realism in their book? Who was the first one to do it, right? So have a more or less stream of consciousness sort of approach to your studying, that you jump from one text, one author to another, because you relate everything, right? You study in context. So this is something that you can employ when you're studying, right? So George Orwell becomes important. Now, this is from NET 2013, right? This is the same sort of question that has been asked in NET 2013, some 10 years ago, before GATE chose to ask this question about Eric Arthur Blair or George Orwell, right? So we have to say that which among these statements are false. So first one is Eric Arthur Blair became the famous British novelist George Orwell. So we know this, right? That Eric Arthur Blair is the real name of George Orwell. George Orwell is a pseudonym of Eric Arthur Blair. Then the second option is Orwell was conversant in Hindustani, fond of Indian food. Eric Blair lived in Myanmar's trading town Katha. This town also became important in his book Burmese Days, right? So we know that he was born in 1903 in Motihari, Bihar, right? So now Motihari, Bihar has been a commemorative committee that wants to have a museum of sorts for Orwell. Then we know, or do we know, that Orwell returned or did not return to his birthplace, which is Motihari, Bihar. And then that he was a journalist, right? And then he was a journalist, but there was also a British journalist, Ian Jack, who's responsible for our knowledge of Orwell's life. So which of the statements is false? Right, so this is a very dense question. It's also long, but the answer is that all of these statements are true. Right, so the options would be that A, B, C are false, or F is false, or all of them are true, or all of them are false. So the answer was that all of these statements are true, right? George Orwell was born in Motihari in Bihar. His name was Eric Arthur Blair, so on and so forth, right? So all of them are true. Now, identify which novel begins with this statement, right? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, so on. And this is a very, very popular,
Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities.
right? So who is speaking?
Khushi Patel.
Right, Kushi? So it's correct, right? Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities. Can you tell me which are the two cities in the book?
Paris and London.
Right. So Paris and London, and set in the wake of the French Revolution, right? So there are other quotes also that are very famous, but this is a canonical opening line to any book in English literature. So it's often asked that which book begins with this line. So there are other opening lines also, right? This is not a question from somewhere. I thought that these were also important, so I put them in. Now, if you can identify the novels and the writers from the opening lines, then you unmute and tell me, right? The first one is Call Me Ishmael. So which famous book begins with this line?
I'm not sure, but the first one is Moby Dick. I'm not sure.
No, it's correct, right? The first one is Moby Dick. They ask a lot of questions from Moby Dick as to what was the name of the ship that they were in. Moby Dick is, of course, right, the whale. But they ask you that who are the other characters? Who's the character who's got a number of tattoos? How does he survive? So he was this hypochondriac, right? He gets a coffin made, and when eventually the whale attacks the ship, he survives in his own coffin because he comes floating back. So who was this character? What was the name of the boat? So on. So Moby Dick also is a very important book from the perspective of Gate, right? So can you tell me who wrote the book?
Herman Melville.
Right. So Herman Melville, right? He wrote the book. He was a very famous American writer. Then the second line is Mama died today or maybe yesterday. I am not sure.
The Outsider.
Outsider or The Stranger, right? By Albert Camus. So it is a canonical text in existentialism and absurd literature and the movement of absurdism, right? So it's about this man who finds himself alienated from society, from his own self, which is why the title is The Outsider or The Stranger. So the opening line is, then my mother died today, or maybe it was yesterday, I'm not sure, right? So this is a very detached tone where you wouldn't speak like this, right? A pathetic tone. So this is a famous opening line. Another, I think this everybody knows, right? It is truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife.
Pride and
Pride and
Prejudice.
Prejudice.
Right.
This is Pride and Prejudice. Jane Austen's also very important from the perspective of Ned. Then this one, it was a bright cold day in April and the clocks were
1984.
right? So this is 1984. So look up these famous lines, look up famous quotes from the book, look up famous characters and how these characters have influenced popular culture. So try and do these, right? Look up pseudonyms of other writers. So all of this will help. If you're curious, it helps. Right? This is another question from Gate. So these are the last words of which character? The horror, the horror. And it's a famous novella that is also a novella of a voyage.
Quotes in Heart of Darkness.
Yes,
Option D.
yeah, so it's from Heart of Darkness. It's very famous. So it's a very thin book. You can actually read the whole thing, right? And it's very important text also. Now this is match the following, right? So if you know one or two options, you'll be able to do this. This is from GATE. So these are options, and you have to match the text with the language that they were originally written in.
Option A.
Option A, you're saying?
Option B. Option B.
Okay, tell me one answer.
Option D. The revenue stamp and autobiography is written in English.
Okay, why do you say that? Who is the author?
Amrita Pritam.
Amrita Pritam, right? So Amrita Pritam primarily wrote in
Punjabi.
Punjabi, right? So we know that C will go for 4. So there are two options, B and C, where C is linked to 4, which is Rasidi ticket, right? Revenue stamp and autobiography, which is C and 4. So either it's option B or option C. Now, if you know any other text, then we can figure it out.
Jhuthan Adalat's life was written in Hindi.
In
In Hindi, right? Waiting for a Visa is Ambedkar's book that was written in English, right? And Prisons We Broke in Marathi. So the answer becomes, which is it from B and C? A is 2, right? So C. So the answer is C. Waiting for Visa is Ambedkar's book in English. Then there is B. Prisons We Broke in Marathi. Rasidi Ticket in Punjabi, and Jhuthan Adalit's life in Hindi. Right? So,
Abhigya ji,
yes, sir.
uh,
Okay.
I'm sorry, but your
Yes.
time is up.
Okay. Right.
It was from 10:30 to
Correct.
11:30.
No, I'm so sorry, sir.
And
I'll stop sharing. I had a few more questions, but I think that you've got the pattern, right? Can I take questions, or we're really just running out of time?
so another speaker is present now, so we have to hand over
Okay.
to her.
No problem, sir. I'm so sorry.
No, it was going very well,
Sir,
and
if
we enjoyed it.
Sir, sorry to disturb, but if the students have any questions, let them interact. I'll wait for 5 more minutes. It's okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So if I had a few more questions, but if any of you have questions with regards to the syllabus, your preparation, something I spoke about today, then please do ask.
Ma'am, if I may.
Yes,
My question is, I do face problem while, like for example, in 18th century or in 19th century, or in like in one century, there are many words. And in fact, in one particular year, there are multiple words. I would like to know
Correct.
how to, like tackle that situation. Because it's not
So
like, for
I-
example, in 1819, something is happening in British literature, something in American, something in Indian. So it gets very difficult, and it just gets very confusing and messy. So
No, I get that. And the syllabus also is hugely vast, right? So firstly, accept that you can't humanly cover everything that's asked of you. So first, any which way approach the exam with a detached mindset. But secondly, also know what was happening, right? So if you know that 1919 is a crucial year because World War II ended, right? And what else happened in 1919? So World War II ends in UK, which is why in England and everywhere, right? So which is why, for example, colonial powers weaken in India, right? So there's a direct link. So in England, there's war poetry, right? So people like Rupert Brooke wrote war poetry. But in India, there was also Jallianwala Bagh incident. So Rabindranath Tagore gives up his prefix, which was Sir Rabindranath Tagore. So he gives up the Sir part of his name, right? So he returns that to the British because of what happened in Jallianwala Bagh. So this is something that happened in India. Then there was a progressive writers movement that began to take shape in London, and then later on that was formulated in India. Then, for example, someone like Ismat Chugtai was a part of it. So look at what happened in history and remember that all the books or all the authors or all the events, literary events that happen in a certain context, right? If you look at the French Revolution, it happened in 1789. Then 1798 is when Wordsworth and Coleridge wrote lyrical ballads, right? And then Wordsworth wrote Bliss it was in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. So he was alluding to the French Revolution. So sometimes you have to make up your own patterns. Notice the numbers like how we did with 1894, right? And written in 1984, written in 89. Wait, 1984, written in 1894. I'm not sure. Okay, but I think look up patterns. Remember that, follow the history of a period and therefore link it. So 1919 becomes an important year. Also remember that you can't do everything. So look at the canonical works and look how one writer shapes the movement of another writer. So who all were in the Bloomsbury group? When did they write? Who published whose book? Virginia Woolf published, for example, or help published James Joyce's work. Sylvia Plath also wrote around that time. What was her pseudonym? So link up all the writers in one age through studying the history of that year or that decade. So I think that helps. But also a lot of it depends on memory, depends on how well you're able to remember what happened just for the sake of it, and then eventually build a context around it. Sometimes using mnemonics also helps. So you have to figure out your own pattern. But what helps is reading the history of that age closely, looking at certain common patterns, right? So after World War II, you know that theater of the absurd came up, existentialism came up, surrealism, Dadaism. So all of them, expressionism, all of them are movements that have to do with a certain anti-establishment mentality, that have to do with absurdism, that have to do with the idea of the breakdown of communication. So these are themes that are common. So when you're reading all the texts, you know that, oh, these themes will perhaps be reflected in the text that I'm studying. So look at the history closely, right? So I think that is all.
Thank you very much, Abhigyaji.
Thank
On
you,
behalf
sir.
of my
Thank you so much.
students and the department, I thank you. Had it been 2 hour session, it wouldn't have been.
No, I'm so
Uh,
sorry. I was late. There was some technical issue also, but I think I enjoyed myself.
Okay. So
So I
now another
take.
speaker will be there. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you very
thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Mhm. Please. Hello, madam, am I visible? Am I audible? But you are not audible.
I think now I will be audible. I had
Ah,
put myself on mute
okay.
mode.
Okay. On behalf of the students and the department, we welcome you. And there will be a small introduction. Okay. So
Yes, sir.
Dr. Vaishnav serves as an assistant professor at Government Arts and Commerce College, Bawla, Gujarat. She has also worked at SAPT University and in Nirma University at Ahmedabad. After completing her doctoral research from Saurashtra University, Rajkot, she continues to study literature criticism, Indian writing in English, climate fiction, and contemporary theories in higher education. She has authored a book called Amitav Ghosh's Writings, Issues, Ideologies, and Craftsmanship, published by Atlantic Publishers. She has got many of her papers published in national and international journals and books. She has also presented papers in national and international seminars and conferences in India and abroad, the most recent being at University of Leicester, July 2019 and at Oxford University, October 2019. On behalf of the department and on the behalf of the student participants, we welcome you. And now I hand over to you. Okay. So,
Thank you so
Bhakti.
Thank you so much, sir. Uh, Good afternoon to all the participants, and thank you so much to the department. Now, I think like when I saw the previous presenters thing, I'm a bit confused. I'm not confused, but I'm a bit nervous that I've not prepared my presentation in terms of MCQs, and that might be really helpful to the students. But myself being a member of the old school, where I feel that the fundas should be clear. And if the fundas are clear, MCQs can be tackled. So I prepared a PPT that deals with the basics of new literature. Now, I'm told there is someone who is already going to talk about new literature from the, just a second, is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, but it's not visible to me. Give me 2 minutes. Let me see if I'm able to see it. Yeah, now I can see the screen. Now let's just go into a brief background of history, as somebody was asking this question regarding the enormous amount of information that is there for each work and for each age that we all need to tackle with. And I totally agree with the point that there are so many points that a student needs to remember when it comes to remember works, the major writers and canonical texts of each age, along with the features like this of new era, new criticism, new historicism, and all those isms coming into picture, and the works based on such philosophy. The key to such things, according to my view, is that we have to understand the historical background a bit. And then once you start, when you enter the tunnel of any particular historical era or a particular canon, what we need to do is we have to approach it with a tunnel uh, vision. In the sense, you kind of narrow down to the age and the basic philosophy, or what are the major events of this era, or that era, and what propelled certain kind of works, or any ism, or any kind of belief system that triggered so many other works, or what were the social, political, historical events that shaped or that were playing key roles. And when you talk about new literature, we cannot keep it aside the history of colonization. And as we also know, has someone already talked to you about post-colonial literature or new literature in general? Hello? Am I audible?
Yes.
I'm asking students, if you have any idea about post-colonial literature or new literature, or does the term ring any bell? So
Yes,
maybe
yes.
I'm the has sir the speaker before me has already introduced the term, or should I introduce it?
No, they know it. They
Okay,
have
okay, sir.
syllabus in new. Uh,
Okay, okay. In that case, we all know what is new literature, and we are very much aware of the fact that new literature is very much part that carries the baggage of colonial legacy, and it is also like, as it has been dubbed as Empire Writes Back, or you can call it the answer to Orientalism and things like that. But since post-colonial literature as a term carried a lot of sense of being the other, new literature is preferred. And when we talk about new literature in English are indeed new, as I already mentioned there. It started somewhere late in or the second half of 20th century in 1950s. So as the history books of literature suggest, the West African literature in English emerged in 1950s, West African in 1960s, and indigenous writing in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand in 1970s. And Black and Asian British literature proliferated in 1980s. It doesn't mean that no literature of new kind of new literature existed before this decades, but this is when it came out in prominence, and rather it was recognized very well during this time. So we all, as I already said, that Britain had already taken control of many regions and ruled parts of Africa, Australia, Bangladesh, Canada, Caribbean, and it had also gained control over countries as India, Malaysia, New Zealand, Pakistan, Singapore, South Pacific Islands, Sri Lanka. So new literature comes from these places that were once colonies of Britain. Some of the most common topics that are addressed in post-colonial or new literature are, one is they talk about hegemony. We all know the word hegemony, which talks about the power struggle, which talks about the hierarchies that were created during the colonial regime and the white man's burden kind of a theory, and then how the natives, the colonized, answered to those hegemonies that ruled the world during the colonial period. That is one major theme of this literatures. Second and very prominent is language. They focus so much on language, and one of the examples for this is found in Raja Rao's Kanthapura, and another example is found in Nigerian writer called Chinua Achebe. About him, we will discuss in detail in our later part of the session. Raja Rao and Achebe have found it, they emphasized and called it necessary to transform the language, English language, to use it in a different way in its new context. Now, what was this new context? New context was like when this natives started answering, the natives started representing their own countries, the natives started talking about their own culture. So the language, English language, required to be transformed in a manner which was then capable of serving this purpose. And so, as Achebe says, quoting James Baldwin, what they tried to do is make it bear the burden of their experiences. Now, experience is the key term when it comes to new literature. Third most important theme of this literature is place and displacement. As we all know that there was a lot of migration that took place, forceful migration, willful migrations that took place during this colonial period. We all know Black Lives Matter, and we also know about the slave trade, and we also know about Indians going to Europe for the higher studies and coming back and fighting for freedom. So there was a lot of movement that took place, and like the sense of displacement was within one's own house also. Like when Britishers came to India, or whether Britishers went to Canada, or maybe when they went to Caribbeans, they all faced this displacement within their own house. Same is the case with African experience, where they were made to like the heart of darkness kind of attitude by the Europe for African, made them displaced within their own culture. They were conscious efforts to root them out from their culture, from their place, physical place, their emotional place. So there were so many things that were happening in terms of displacement, and this is very strongly reflected in the works that are labeled as new literatures. Now, since there, I mean, you all know that there can be so many authors and so many types of writings that took place or that can be labeled as new literatures. What I've tried to do is, in 1 hour session, I cannot take up all those who are very much important. I have tried to select a few from African and Australian writings. If time permits, I will take few more, but I'm not very sure if I'll be able to do justice to all the new literatures that are not non-English or non-European, because then you would have to study African writing. We also need to study Australian writing. We also need to study Caribbean writing. We also need to study authors like Hanif Qureshi, Monica Ali, people like who is this person, the author of English Patient? I'm not. The name is slipping out of my mind. We also have Odanji. So there are so many authors that we need to look up and read and understand when we are talking about new literatures. So again, this is a very vast territory which covers almost more than 50% of our globe. As we all know that the sun never set in British Empire. So you have colonies everywhere, and with the turn of the century, there is so much that is coming out in terms of new literature. So you will have to keep an eye on all of them. But these are few that came to my mind very prominently when I started looking up for the net and sled papers, and I came across some of the authors that are repetitively asked. So I just thought we could discuss them and it might be helpful. So when Europe was under there was this great issue regarding representation of Africa and portrayal of African society. There is lot of sense of reiterating or asserting oneself when it comes to African writing, because as Ngugi wa Thiong'o in his writing against neo-colonialism says that the political, economic and social circumstances that form the sensibility of most African writers, we need to write about them. They talk about, so what these authors do, they illuminate the various types of mentalities or ideologies that inform African literature. In addition, these works also help the reader to determine if a novelist's portrayal of African society is fully reflected in its social relations, political arrangements, and economic factors. So this is what Thiong'o preached, that when you are talking about or when you are scrutinizing writings that are tagged as writings against neo-colonialism, these are the things that one needs to look up or one has to think about or pay attention to. So if we pay attention, these are the very indicators that can be seen in African writings. So that is one is the mentalities and ideologies that inform about African traditional literature or portrayal of African society with its social, political arrangements and economic factors, how colonialism affected all these. These are the focus points. Now we come to the major writer of African writing, the novelist Chinua Achebe. He was the joint winner of Commonwealth Poetry Prize also in 1972. Achebe is considered as the man who laid the foundation for African literature. Now we all know that when you talk about African literature, we can not mention Achebe and Ngugi wa Thiong'o, because they are the foundations upon which the whole discourse of African writing, new literature is based on. So you cannot not read them. You need to know about them. His writing styles molds the English language. Again, the focus is on language, where he tries to bring in the rhythm and lyrical quality of Nigerian language in English that his characters use in his works. His style incorporates the proverbs, idioms of African culture, and combines his stories as it makes his stories uniquely African. So the language is English, but the stories are uniquely African when it is written by Chinua Achebe. Achebe also sees his role as a writer as one of the very important role of having a social responsibility. In his book of essays, which is titled as Morning Yet on Creation Day, he explains that art is and always was at the service of men. Our ancestors created their myths and legends and told their stories for a human purpose. So this purpose that were created by their ancestors, because we know that when you talk about African culture, there is lot of reference to the ancestral heritage and references also. So when Achebe talks about or represents the Igbo culture, there are lot of references. There are stories and the plots that are woven around the tradition that refers and pays homage to their myths and legends that were typically created by their ancestors. Therefore, Achebe believes that all good stories should have a purpose, and that is what he has tried to emulate in all his works. Now, there is this praise by this person called Charles Larson, which I quoted because I thought it represents the importance of things fall apart in general. So he says that it has become to be regarded as more than simply a classic. It is now seen as the archetypal African novel. So this can be one of the questions in MCQ, that which of the novels by Achebe is known as archetypal African novel. So could be there. The situation which the novel itself describes is the coming of the white man and the initial disintegration of traditional African society as a consequences of that is typical of the breakdown of all African societies have experienced at one time or another. So it's very typical of white men coming to a colony, then disintegrating the society. And this is a common experience to most of the, not all, but of most of the colonies that he talks about in this novel. And this is also a kind of an encounter that is triggered because it's a result of their exposure to the West. Achebe's first novel, Things Fall Apart, was published in 1958. And besides Things Fall Apart, Achebe has also all these famous works to his credit, which are equally important. So there is this No Longer at Ease, Arrow of God, A Man of the People, and Hills of Savannah. Some of his significant contribution in poetry are listed as Beware, Saul Brothers, and other poems that was published in 1972, Christmas in Biafra, and other poems. He has also written essays, as we already saw in the beginning or the introduction, that he was also a critic. So his essays are collected in under the title called Morning Yet on Creation Day, The Trouble with Nigeria, and the Hopes and Impediments in 1988. Post-colonial critics think his essay, An Image of Africa, racism in Conrad's Heart of Darkness is considered to be a seminal one for post-colonial studies. So this essay is also very important. So we should pay attention to the title and uh, uh, the reference with which it has got importance with or about. Things Fall Apart again is one the most striking feature of this novel is to create a complex and sympathetic portrayal of traditional village culture in Africa. He talks about the Igbo community, and Achieve is trying not only to inform the outside world about the Igbo cultural traditions, but he's also reminding his own people about their own tradition and helps them assert their past and assert their values. To make it is also a kind of realization. It is also kind of what Vivekananda did to India, like to arouse a kind of confidence within one's towards one's own culture and traditions. All too many Africans in his time were ready to accept the European judgment that Africa had no history or culture worth considering. Achibi is kind of answering and defying the label of the area of darkness or heart of darkness that was tagged for African continent, because Britishers basically said, Europeans rather basically said that Africa had no history of its own. So he is defying that notion in this novel. Throughout the novel, he portrayed the richness and diversity of the African culture. The language of the novel is simple and dignified. The characters speak, whenever they speak, they use an elevated diction which is meant to convey the sense of Igbo speech. Pardon me the typo error there. This choice of language was not only creative but also innovative and invoked the richness of African language. The title of the novel again can be a question, is taken from Yeats's poem The Second Coming. We all know about this poem, right? Yes or no? Are you all awake? Next important author from Africa I am going to take is Wole Soyinka. Wole Soyinka wrote this famous play, A Dance of Forest. Actually, he was commissioned to write this play, which was performed in 1960 and was published in 1963. It is called by this critic as a lyrical blend of Western experimentalism and African folk tradition, reflecting a highly original approach to drama. So this also can go for a question. If I were a paper setter, I might ask which of Wole Soyinka's drama was labeled as a blend of Western experimentalism and African folk tradition. So pay attention here. His 2 years in solitary confinement during 1967 and 1969, he was given a punishment for supporting Nigerian uprising, because Wole Soyinka and his work are very much in his works are, because you cannot detach his philosophy, political beliefs from his works. So his involvement in the uprising and the Nigeria's movement to get out of from the dictator, he was sentenced to the jail, and there he wrote a memoir called The Man Died, Prison Notes of Wole Soyinka. This is also important work. Soyinka's literary career is enriched by the plurality of his writing. He is well known as a playwright, but he's also a poet and critic. His plays have a blend of the Western tradition, as we already have been introduced, that he combined Western tradition and African traditional popular theater in one, with lot of elements of traditional dance, music, and action. He reworks into his plays the mythology of his Yoruba tribe and centers the play around Ogun, the god of iron and war. His first plays, The Swamp Dwellers and The Lion and the Jewel, were performed in 1958 and 59 respectively, and then later on were published in 63. His mentionable comedies are The Trial of Brother Jero, with its sequel. Then there is this Dance of Forests, as we said, discussed earlier, Congi's Harvest, and Madmen and Specialists. These are his important plays, which we need to keep in mind when we are talking about Wall Soyinka's works. Some of his plays, such as The Strong Breed and Road and The Death and The King's Horseman, are also important from the point of view of representation of African culture in terms, and because Wall Soyinka becomes very important because he seamlessly combines the Western form of drama and African traditional forms of music and dance in his plays, which is very interesting. Soyinka's latest dramatic works were like It's Time, so A Play of Giants, and Requiem for the Futurologists. He has written 2 novels, namely The Interpreters and Seasons of Anomy. Seasons of Anomy deals with the writer's thoughts during his imprisonment and confronts the Orpheus and Eurydice myth with the mythology of the Yoruba. So this is also an interesting point that we have to remember. Remember, when we are talking about each author or each literary figure, we also have to remember their major work and something unique about each work, because nobody is going to ask about something which is very common in all his works. It can be a very simple question that what are the common themes in Wall Soyinka's plays. Then it can be a very general question, but for text, they would generally prefer to ask something which is unique about each text. So remember these novels and what do they represent. Remember the plays that were written and what do they do. Remember Yoruba tribe. If it is Achibi, you have to remember its Igbo community. So things are like these are important from our MCQ point of view. His literary essays are collected and published as Myth Literature and African World, The Open Stores of a Continent, a personal narrative of the Nigerian continent. He has also written poetries, and they are collected under the title as Idandre and Other Poems, Poems from Prison, A Shuttle in the Crypt. Long poems of his are collected under the title of Ogun Abibiman and Mandela's Earth and Other Poems. Soyinka's poem Telephone Conversation is a reflection of racial perceptions, and it uses a satirical tone to depict the meaninglessness of racism. This poem, why I thought of highlighting is because when I looked up, I found this poem to be part of syllabus of postgraduate syllabi of many universities. So I thought this can be one of the important questions. He has, as I said, we have to remember that Soyinka's writings and politics are interwoven, so you cannot separate 2 of them. Soyinka implored African writers to become the conscious of their nations, otherwise they would be forced to withdraw to the position of chronicler and postmortem surgeon. This is important because this shows his own stand of writing, and this is what he expected Nigerian or African writers to do. They had to become the conscious. They had to become the speaking conscious of their nations. He won the Nobel Prize in 1986. The Nobel Committee characterized his works as follows. He has his roots in Yoruba people's myths, rites, and cultural patterns, which in turn have historical links to the Mediterranean region. Through his education in his native land and in Europe, he has also acquired deep familiarity with Western culture. I forgot to mention the fact that he went to Europe for higher studies, but most of the writers that we are going to study, especially from the places like India or Africa, uh, even Judith Wright, for that matter, they all have been teaching or either studying in Europe or in America. So they were directly in exposure. They had good exposure of Western culture and Western traditions as well, not just in their homes, because in their homelands, the colonies or the Western culture was treating them different, and their experience in their own the origin places, the countries were different. His collection of essays represent myth literature and the African world. The title the essay number 33, Myth Literature and the African World, make for clarifying and enriching reading. This is what the Nobel Committee had mentioned when he was awarded the prize in 1986. One more important author from African continent is Aidoo. Ama Ata Aidoo has experimented in different genres such as fiction, drama, and poetry. Most of her stories deal with the role of women in process of change. Now, this is interesting because this is also a representation of a woman's voice from African continent. Now, in our times, we have many American African or African American writers like Chimamanda coming out and talking about their experiences. But this is the beginning of change we are talking about. And she becomes more prominent for her works where she was talking about the role of women and how women took the experience of this change or the process of change that was happening in Africa. Aidoo became popular when she wrote the play Dilemma of Ghost. It was a play that dealt with problem of conflict between traditional culture and Western education and values. The play portrays Ato Yawasan, a young man from Ghana who returns home after getting educated in the US and brings with him seeds of conflict. The tension is increased by his wife's unawareness and irresponsibility. In the end, Ato's mother helps to relieve the tension in the family. Her next work was collection of short stories, that is No Sweetness Here, written from the mid 1960s, and it was sorry for the typo again. It was a kind of collection of short stories in the similar trend, where she's talking about the conflict that was happening of the West and the tradition of Ghana, and how people were responding to it in different manner. And there was this also emphasis on not letting go of one's own roots and finding a way out. It's not just cribbing about it or just leaving it at that there is this conflict, but there is this sense of finding a way out. Aidoo's semi-autobiographical novel is known as Our Sister Killjoy, or Reflections from a Black-Eyed Squint, that was published in 1977. And this book delineates the interaction between an African and European culture. In a way, the book also deals with the psychological impact of post-colonialism on women by depicting Sissy, the disillusioned young woman who has become alienated by her experience in England and Bavaria, Germany. Now, Sissy, when she goes to England and when she tries to find a house for rent, from there her disillusionment begins because she's judged by her skin color, and the negotiations never center around the financial condition of this lady or the social status of this woman, but she's always judged and thrown out because of her skin color. So this is a very interesting point of view of sharing a black woman's experience in Europe. Then Someone Talking to Some Time is a poetry collection, and The Eagle and the Chicken was written by her, which is also a children's book, which is important because again it was written with this idea of introducing children to their own roots, talking to children about their own stories, their own traditional stories. Then we have Nadine Gordimer. Gordimer has more than 13 novels and 10 short story collection. And her works are published and translated in about 40 languages. Many of her earlier works dealt with the issue of racism and depict the moral and psychological tensions of life experienced by the colonized or the oppressed colored characters. She was very much opposed to the apartheid and refused to accept the system. Although she was white, so she grew up in a community in which racism or racial discrimination was a very normal practice. But she took a different stand, and her work has therefore been a type of propaganda projecting the illness of apartheid movements. In Gordimer's work, there is an affection for her homeland and its people, a love of its epic haunting landscapes and potent past. This is juxtaposed with an examination of the devastating psychological effects of political persecution on the lives of the ordinary South Africans, and it is with this which gives her works its moral force and imaginative richness. So many things in one and so many things to remember, but let me break it for you. First, if you are thinking or trying to find out the major features of her work, then you will find that she describes the landscapes. Again, landscapes of the native land. For her native was South Africa, and she was talking about its landscape and its past. Then what she does is she juxtaposes the devastating psychological effects due to this political persecution that was happening in Africa because of the difference of the skin color and the rulers being the white people. So we all know what happened there. So she is trying to talk about this devastating effects on the psychology of the people there, not just the physiological or the social or economical, but psychologically also these black characters, they were getting affected. Most of our characters depictions are faced with the issues such as exile and compromise, exploitation and alienation. She is also questioning the white supremacy and exposes the weaknesses of their arguments. She also reveals how white self-justification and benevolence hide a latent egoism. Like, she's talking about being white. She knows the hollowness of this whole propaganda of white supremacy. And that is why she talks about it in a very upfront manner. Her major works are like The Lying Days, which was her first work, and this is a semi-autobiographical novel in which she depicts the master and servant relationship she depicts the master-servant relationship in her next three works that are A World of Strangers, Occasion for Living, and The Late Bourgeois World. Master-servant relationship, we all know who is master and who is the servant when it comes to colonization. She was the joint winner of the Booker Prize for her fiction in 1974. The novel that was selected for this was The Conservationist. Just after the Soweto uprising in South Africa, she wrote Berger's Daughter, which was banned. And because of this novel's content, which was so much exposing, it was and very so candid and exposing the white man's practice there. The book was banned, and along with this, the previous books that were published, they were also banned. The House Gun investigates through a murder trial the complexities of violence-ridden post-apartheid South Africa. The theme of forced emigration is delineated in her novel The Pickup. The novel is set in South Africa and Saudi Arabia. The forced emigration is also a very important aspect of new literature. We might think that the slave trade was only the forced migration, but that's not true. Forced emigration is also like we have seen, if you read Amitav Ghosh's Sea of Poppies, you will realize that many of the immigrants who traveled, they traveled as an escape from their social reality and financial conditions, which was inflicted again by colonizers. So it was another form of forced migration. So it was not just they were made bonded laborers and they went, but even after apartheid movement or the destruction that took place in their native lands, the people, for social and economical reasons, they had to leave their own country in order to pursue their dreams, for finding better education or to gain a little bit of more financial upper hand in their own society. So this was again a forced emigration that also leads to a kind of alienation, because you go to, in your own country, you are treated as other, and when you go to the other country, you are again considered outsider and you are considered somebody who is inferior. So this catch-22 situation for the colonized keeps on going on, and that is reflected very well in new literature, especially in the works, her works. She also published a novel called Get a Life, which again talks about similar experience. Next, we come to Australia. Now, Australia, we know the major authors. Who are the major authors of Australia? Can someone tell me? If somebody has already started reading about new literatures. Can we name a few authors? Patrick White? Does it ring a bell? Okay, before we jump to the other continent, do you have any questions regarding Africa? We can take them. So we can break the monotony of so many information bombardment on yourself. And if you have any doubts, we can discuss them. Okay, in that case, let me ask you a question. Are you all able to, you are all okay with the way I'm making my presentation? Or you want me to change it?
No, carry on, madam.
Okay. It's okay, no? Right. So, we move to another continent which was described as a continent which was meant for punishment. Australia has been treated as a continent that was a kind of penalty to go to, right? Europeans considered it as, and look at the Australia that we see nowadays. So there is this big shift, but it became or it started to get recognized only after Patrick White received Nobel Prize in 1973. And the other notable writers that emerged from Australia since 1970s, they include the dual Booker Prize winner Peter Carey and David Malouf. Helen Darville masqueraded. She is important because her work came into much controversy, and that's why I thought we should know about it. That she masqueraded as Helen Demideco, won major literary prizes for her controversial work that was Hand That Signed the Paper, which became very popular and went on to win over many literary prizes everywhere. Before it was found out that this was a controversy, and there was this big controversy over the connection or the content of her novel, which was based on the conflict of Nazis in Ukraine. So again, if you pay attention, we have somebody called we have novels like Book Thief, again, that deals with World War and Nazis presence and the World War II in coming from Australia. We also have another important author, James Clavell, in his collection of works called the Asian Saga, Australian literature, which is namely the depiction of Far Eastern culture as represented in Neville Shutt's work. We also have Sally Morgan's My Place, which is considered a breakthrough novel in terms of bringing indigenous stories to wider notice. Another important milestone in the history of is the work called The History of Australia, which is written by Manning Clark, which is regarded as the definitive account of the nation, because Australia, being Australia, is always accused of not having any culture or history of its own, because it was populated by the people who were sent there as an exile or in form of punishment. The one important figure of from Australia, from Net's point of view, is A.D. Hope, who was an Australian poet and essayist, and he's known for his satirical slant. He was also a critic, teacher, and academician. His satirical note was so strong, especially in his earlier work, that he wrote this mock heroic epic called Dunshared Mirror, which was a contemporary version of Pope's Dunshared, which again was a mock epic poem. But that becomes less evident as we move towards his later poems. His interest in mythology, seen as embodying the great commonplaces of human life, remained until the end, as is apparent in the title of his final collection, which is Orpheus. That is his final collection of poems. His first collection was titled as The Wandering Islands. It did not appear until 1955, by which time he had already been recognized as a poet of eminence. Again, he was spending time in Europe. He studied there, he worked there for a while, and while he was there, many of his poems were published in various magazines and journals. So he was quite famous by the time his first collection of poetry came out. This collection was praised for his skillful use of traditional words, forms, and critique of contemporary values, and it received the Grace Levin Poetry Prize. In his most celebrated poem, Australia, Eddie Hope questions the idea that whether Australia is civilized or not. This is an interesting poem because it talks about these issues of Australia as a continent, its history, its culture, the geographical representation, and the actual geography of Australia. He sees Australia as a country that is bleak and almost colorless and dull. This very much resembles I'm quoting from the poem, filled uniform of modern wards, where everything is in shade of grey and green. The poet likens the country to a sphinx. The sphinx was a figure from Egyptian myth again, which possessed the body of lion and head of a man. We all know about it. This comparison could be directly related to author's vision of Australia. So there is this fusion. Australia becomes a fusion of indigenous people and the colonizers. So it becomes a symbolic representation of the culture of Australia. The poet suggests that Australia's realm of intelligence and power have now been worn away, which also suggests that Australia used to be better than what it is now. So he highlights the fact that Australia did have its past before the colonizers came. He believes that Australia is a country that is very old. People may call Australia a young country, but they lie. And that lie is with purpose. Australia to him is the last of lands, the emptiest, a woman beyond her change of life, a breast still tender, but within the womb is dry. Now we come to the next writer, which is who is Judith Wright, who was a prolific Australian poet, critic, and short story writer. She published more than 50 books. She is also seen as an uncompromising environmentalist and social activist who has campaigned for Aboriginal land rights. She believed that the poet should be concerned with national and social problems. And that is what gets reflected in her works also. Her first collection was The Moving Image, in which she showed the technical excellence. Most of the poems written in these poems were written during wartime. The next one is The Trains, in which she took the threat of the war in the Pacific as her subject. The main theme in the volume was the poet's awareness of time, death, and the evil on the universal scale, because the wars, that was kind of time when the evil got its upper hand and death was very much prominent. So that these subjects get very much represented in this collection of poems. With the following collections, Wright gained a reputation as a wholly new voice in literature with a distinctly female perspective. Again, she becomes important because she provides a female perspective to war or maybe to colonization and to the growing devastation of environment and the landscape in Australia. The title poem From Woman to Man deals with the sexual act from a woman's point of view. Then the maker is parallel the creation of a poem and the creation of a child. Several of her early poems, such as Bullocky and Woman to Man, became standard anthology pieces, though these are most taught and read poems of her. Wright also wrote love poems to her husband. His death in 1966 and her increasing anxiety over the destruction of the natural environment introduced more pessimistic undercurrents in her later works. Right in the mid 50s, commented that the two threads of my life, the love of the land itself and the deep unease over the fate of its original people, were beginning to twine together, and the rest of my life would be influenced by that connection. So the rest of her works show this intertwining of love for her land and people and deep
Uh,
unease about what was happening. Yes, sir.
uh, you have 5 minutes or so.
Okay, sir. I'm about to
And
wind up.
huh,
I'm about
huh.
to wind up. In her poem, The Two Faces, she took Hiroshima as an example of man's power to destroy even the cycles of nature. Rights activism on conservation issues led her to focus on the interaction between land and the language. In the poems like The Birds, Five Senses, and The Other Half, she looks at the deep unconscious self that night undrones when I'm asleep. Now, here she talks about the uh, devastation that are drowned and undrowned when she's asleep. So she also shows the effect on women's psychology and the life when the devastation of environment and the aboriginal people was taking place. In Shadow, she begins to tackle some of the issues of the day and with special focus on Vietnam War. The poem Alive saw her move away from issues like the Vietnam War to questions of society and the forces that are exerted on people. In Tableau, which is a short story, she shows a man staggering in panic and despair, being ignored by the passing crowd. Right, examines her reaction and how she fights against the dehumanizing conditioning of society to his aid. Tableau shows how a person or a man gets alienated or becomes totally unnoticed when a person starts living in crowd, and how the society becomes completely insensitive because of the dehumanizing conditioning of our time, where man has become totally uh, absorbed in his own world, and each man is alienated from the other person. So man in himself an island, drifted from the other island sort of place, and she shows that how humanity fails to save this person or come to his aid in this short story. So it also becomes an important work. She's indicating here the loss of creativity and the state of nationalism that the present Australia has degenerated into her poem, The Train Journey. I had also tried to include Derek Walcott, who is a Caribbean poet who received the Nobel Prize. But since we don't have much time, what I can do is I can share my slides with the organizers, and maybe they can share it with you people. What I've tried to do is that I've tried to we all know Derek Walcott is a very important voice from Caribbean island, and his work, he obviously received Nobel Prize in 1992, and he has written these famous plays. His poems are very important, which talks about his philosophy, where he explores his own situation as a black writer in America, who has become increasingly estranged from Caribbean homeland. He's talking about personal isolation caught between his European cultural orientation and the black folk cultures that is native to his Caribbean roots. He talks about, these are his famous poems. He examines subjects like that intersect, that meet with the intersections of literature and politics and the art of translation. So Walcott is a very important and prominent figure, and these poems and their titles we have to remember before going to write the NET or SLET examinations. So this was about Derek Walcott, but I would not be going into details, which you can get from my slides, or maybe you can look up and find out, because he is very important and phenomenal figure in new literatures. So this is what I had to say. There are other slides, but I am afraid I will not be able to talk about Alice Walker or maybe other writers.
Okay, ma'am. Parul madam will collect your PPT
Yes, sir.
from you.
Yeah, sir. I'll mail it.
Okay. Thank you very much. So
Thank
on
you, sir.
behalf of the students and on behalf of the department, we thank you for
Thank you
sparing
so much,
your
sir.
time for our students. Thank you so
Pleasure
much.
is mine, sir.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
See you. See you.
See you, sir. Thank you.